Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the Biosecurity Working Party and deliberations on the hearings that we heard last meeting. So, could I ask Councillor Lambert to open us, please?
Good, I thank you, Mr. Chair. We'll do our whakataka te hau, and if we do it really well, not only will we have a good hui, but we might have final weather later on. Let's hope so. Ahiro tātai. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā tara tara ki tai. E hia ki ana, te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, tihe, mauri ora. Mauri ora, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lambert. Just a couple of notices. This meeting's been live streamed and recorded. We all know what's doing an earthquake. If we have to leave, meet outside, heading towards Napier Hill along Dalton Street to Tiffin Park. If the alarm sounds, immediately evacuate. Emergency exits are clearly signed, and the council chamber is currently designated a public place, so council's policy is 1 metre physical distancing and face masks required if that is not possible. Thank you. Right, I'll call for apologies.
We have them from Peter Eden and Craig Foss, Councillor Craig Foss so far.
Peter Eden and Craig Foss. Can I have someone move?
So moved.
Thank you, Councillor Van Beek, and Councillor Taylor second. Any conflict of interest declarations pertinent to today? There are none. Confirmation of the minutes of the Biosecurity Working Party held 17th of August. So that was our day of hearings.
Could I just note that I felt I should be noted as a member of the panel, of the working party, rather than a technical advisor.
Correct. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. Otherwise, I'm happy to confirm.
John's happy to move.
Second.
Second, Councillor Van Beek. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Right, and so we move on to deliberations. Would Mark or Lauren like to perhaps open us up to kind of talk to the paper today and where we've got to?
Yeah. So process today, obviously we went out and held submissions. We have received those, and the process today we had the hearings, and the next step is obviously deliberations, which is what we're here to do today. So you'll see, hopefully, and have had a chance to read the staff report. So on one side is all the submissions that were made, and then the relief that they were stating, if it was clear what they were stating, and then the staff response to that as to our views. So what your process today is to go through those and then make your decision on what you believe is what we should accept or otherwise, and then go through the process of pulling together, and John's key part of this, in pulling together a report from the Biosecurity Working Party that will go to council. Effectively, you're going to make a recommendation to council on your decision on this hearing process as to whether we still go ahead and change to contract delivery model, whether we keep the original model or something in between. But that's for you guys to decide today. Lauren, you pulled the paper together and obviously it outlines the reasons for the report and our recommendations as well. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on in particular there that hasn't already been? Hopefully you've all read the paper in regards to the key steps we've undertaken. And so our role today for Lauren and I is really just to answer any questions or give any clarity to the best of our ability. But it's really down to you guys to go through and make your decisions on those submissions. Yeah, that's probably about all I have to add, really.
Anything to add, Lauren?
No, I've got nothing to add. I feel like we've covered all the themes in the paper, and Mark's covered the process, so I'm happy.
Perhaps we'll start off with, is there any questions on the actual process either where we've got to or going forward.
Can I just have another timeline, please, just to see where we sit after today's meeting? What are the next steps? Just so that I know where we roughly sit on the journey.
Okay, so after the deliberations, we're going to pull together a deliberations report, and then as part of that, oh, sorry. So after the deliberations today, we'll be pulling together a deliberations report, which basically encompasses everything that we have discussed today and the decisions that we've reached or the recommendations that we've reached. And then what we do is we put that into a paper and we take that through to council decision on the 28th of September. So that's effectively the last step of the process before we get final decision.
I guess just subsequent to that, Lauren, could you speak to what it is we're actually recommending to council and perhaps what we're not?
Correct. So we are proposing to council that we want to change the delivery of how we currently manage possums. So currently it is an occupier responsibility model, and we are proposing to change that to a contractor-led model instead.
John?
Thank you, Chair. For me, the points 12 and 13 are pertinent because they were the key issues that I think arose out of the submissions, and whilst we can address some of those, we probably can't answer them to the satisfaction of all submitters, but I think each of those probably deserves a little bit of discussion within the working group. And I was pleased to see that on the last page or the appendix to the agenda, the review of potential rating impact. I think that allows us to gain a better appreciation of the import of this policy change and addresses that theme under 13, the costs, where more information was required. So I feel quite confident that we've addressed, by the time we've finished today, we will have addressed those issues arising and be pretty confident to look at the recommendations and agree to those. But you know, I won't prejudge the day's discussion. I just think we've got probably all the information that we need to make a decision at the end of the day. Sorry, a recommendation to council at the end of the day.
Yeah, and let's remember that that's all it is. So particularly on those finances, really good to have good reference, but ultimately it's the full council's decision.
They make the call, yeah.
Make the call on particularly the financial side of it. Sure.
Thank you, Chair. So Mark and Lauren, I think John pointed out in point number 12, I think what I'd like to hear in a little bit more detail, I know we've covered it, but I'd like to just raise it again and talk about it, is that our current system has failed and there's awareness that the current model has weaknesses. Can you speak to the weaknesses a little bit more? And after that, point 1 and point 2, how do you see the contract model being able to override these weaknesses? Yeah.
Sure. So the existing model, land occupier responsibility, that started back, was about 2000, and it grew to roughly 100,000 hectares or so. And the process is council goes in and monitors and makes sure the land occupiers are doing their job. Actually, the step before that, contractors came in, reduced possums to low levels, and then handed it back to the land occupier. So council paid for that initial control cost with the community of land occupiers agreeing to maintain that long term. Some did possum control, some didn't. That program, however, it did work and has worked for a number of years. It's grown to over 700,000 hectares. However, I guess staff resourcing and budget hasn't kept up with that. We've still only got largely one FTE managing that project. So in the monitoring as well, isn't perfect. So we basically have a couple of, and we know possums are increasing from people talking and everything else. So had a couple of options really. One, we increase the resourcing to get more staff to go out and get more sticks to go and whack people to get them to do their possum control. Or the other option being, actually we just take the control on ourselves like Osprey do, get contractors who know what they're doing to go out and manage possums to manage all that risk. So those were the two options. It's just getting contractors in to do the work is it's more expensive. However, it has a whole lot of additional outcomes in regards to knowing we're suppressing possums to low densities. We know we can use a range of tools as opposed to farmers just using Broda-Fukum, which may become a restricted toxin to use as well soon. We know we'll get better biodiversity outcomes because you're not getting these peaks and troughs of possum densities. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's a good thing to do, but there's a cost associated with that. And if you look at the submissions, cost was a really big theme. So that's one of the things I guess that needs to be discussed today. It needs to be balanced up against other priorities within council. Yeah.
Can I also ask the relationship of Osprey and who was before Osprey? Was that Animal Health Board?
Correct, yes.
What's the relationship between the council and those organisations?
So the Animal Health Board used to actually subcontract the work to Hawke's Bay Regional Council, and it was managed by Regional Council on behalf of the Animal Health Board to go out and manage possums. And acknowledge Gary Bocock over here, who should be speaking to this more than me. Actually, he's got a lot of knowledge and has been around for a long time in that space. However, I think it was 2015 or 16, Osprey took that back off the council and are now managing it themselves. I guess the easiest way to describe it is Osprey are there to manage TB, and possums are the main vector of TB. So they do a lot of possum control. As soon as an area is declared proof of freedom, TB is no longer there, they cease control, they walk away. They don't care about possums, they only care about TB. So possum numbers are allowed to come back up unless someone else comes in and protects that investment. So that's why the PCA program has grown to 700,000 hectares quite rapidly. The regional council was coming in behind Osprey's program to protect that through getting land occupiers to continue the control. So the relationship between us is they do a whole lot of control for possums, get rid of TB, and then they leave, and we come in behind that.
So Osprey is paid for by the users.
So Osprey is funded through central government alongside levies. So yeah, that's how they're funded.
Another question, thank you, Chair. So the other thing I'd like to know, Mark, as well is with the one FTE, that's a big job. What kind of response? I know we've talked all about it, but it's good to talk about it again. What kind of response? It's hard to put a percentage on it, but from the land occupiers, you know, what is the reaction? You know, if they don't want to take that responsibility or feel that they are taking responsibility but not being successful, can you give me a somewhat indication of how many land occupiers feel that they're doing enough but aren't? I mean, that's a really hard percentage. But.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the figures that we had in the proposal. I should probably bring the proposal up in front of me. But look, at the end of the day, when we're dealing with the rural landowners, you will struggle to find someone that doesn't want to have possums controlled. And you'll see that here in the themes as well. No one's saying actually possums aren't bad, don't control them. It's just how we go about controlling them. So in regards to the current process, we actually have really strong support from the rural community for this. There is also the acknowledgement from the rural community that they're busy and sometimes they just don't get around to doing it. It is an additional cost sometimes that they can easily sort of, in a tough year, maybe forego doing the control. Equally, if the surrounding land occupiers aren't doing it, well, why should I be doing it? Because I'm just killing the opossums too. There's all that flows into it. When we do our monitoring, the properties that fail, I would say at least 95% go, yeah, cool, I failed, I've just dropped the ball here, I'll get a contractor on, and they remedy the issue. Very few will say, no, I'm going to do my own control, sod off. If they do, that's where we go through a formal compliance process, issuing notices of directions. We go in and do a formal monitor, and if they fail, we act on default, where we do the possum control alongside charging them all the associated administration fees and whatnot. We have only issued 2 or 3 notice of directions in the last few years, so it gives you a sort of feel, given the number of properties that we're monitoring. Generally, people who fail say put their hand up and acknowledge it, and get a contractor in to sort the issue.
One last question to that, please, Chair. So prior to 2000, I think you said, before that land occupier responsibility was put on to them, do you feel it was really successful with the previous work done with the contractors before you handed over that responsibility? Do you think there was
100%. Those contractors reduced possums to near nothing. It was incredible work by those initial contractors, and I think we've been riding on that success of what those contractors did. Reducing possums to such low levels across such a large area, I think that has slowed possums from coming back as quickly as they otherwise would if we hadn't controlled them to such low levels. And with the odd bit of, with the land occupiers doing their bit as well. As always, when a program's new, people are into it and they're doing it, and then over a few years it sort of wanes a little bit. So if it wasn't for that great initial control, I suspect possum numbers would be significantly higher. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Just sorry, Councillor Lemon, I'll come to you, but just subsequent, do we know how council funded that at that time? That must have been like just a one-off, quite
Yes,
large.
so my understanding was it was through rates, so for the initial control. And
As in just a one-off rate increase to fund it, or?
no, I think, look, this was obviously some time ago, a couple of decades. However, my best understanding of it is there's the targeted rate that applied across all farms. They were using that to slowly go through and control possums year by year doing different areas. I don't think it was a specific targeted rate to those specific areas. It was a targeted rate, but against all landowners, and that was just like a rollout phase working through. Yeah.
Councillor Lemon.
Yeah, I've got one question about the consultation process. Is that is there such a thing as a possum industry? There's no submissions I see that come in favour of culling them as opposed to eradicating them.
Yep. So not very big in Hawke's Bay. I know there is further south, and in previous the regional pest management plan, we did receive a submission. I believe they may have been based in Dannevirke from the possum fur industry. However, they will only reduce possums down, for argument's sake, maybe to 15% because they're farming them. They're not actually controlling them. To go the extra step of reducing them down to really low levels, obviously, is a whole lot of traps with very little return. So, unfortunately, trapping for fur helps reduce numbers, but it's certainly nowhere near enough to have the biodiversity or TV or any other gains that we're seeking.
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago when people actually trapped and bought farms with it.
Yeah, so people certainly are. There's still a fur industry.
So, question for me is, and I've asked ratepayers this, who actually are quite passionate about this topic. What percentage of landowners do you think are actually doing an adequate job to the level that we would expect contractors to achieve?
It's a really difficult question. I'm not sure I could answer that right now, apart from a gut feel, and that's always dangerous.
But they're thinking in sort of around about the 15 to 20%. They thought we're actually doing quite a good job. And it's not necessarily that their neighbours are doing a good job, but they really feel that there are pockets and there are farmers who are working together who are doing a good job as well. So often that sort of success breeds success.
Yeah, we collect information, or at least the team were collecting information on what properties were receiving control by contractors, and we know that's reducing every year. I think from memory it was somewhere in between 20 to 30% of the entire PCA area was using a contractor. I'm not sure if that sounds correct, Lauren. I'm pretty sure that was roughly
Yes.
around that figure.
Okay.
And then you add on the people who are doing their own control, which if we use the information from farmlands and whatnot for purchasing the subsidised bait, you're still talking less than 50% of the overall piece.
Less than 50, okay. But still, quite a number are doing it then.
There are.
Extrapolate the subsidised poison that's being sold.
Yep.
If you extrapolate that across the whole region, less than 50%. But it's not a 10 or a 15%.
No,
you would say.
no. No, people are definitely still controlling possums. Look, if everyone stopped, possums would be, again,
Right,
significantly
yeah,
higher than they are right now. Yeah, but there's certainly a few who are doing a lot more than others.
Yeah.
And probably, in effect, controlling other people's possums.
Under the contractor model that we are proposing, what will be the monitoring? What will the monitoring look like?
Or
As in, how are we going to monitor that we actually are successful? Because we're going to spend a serious amount of coin on behalf of our ratepayer. So therefore, we need to have data to prove that actually it is working. How are we going to do that, and what will it look like?
So we would use the residual trap catch method. It's tried and true, stands up in court, and that would be, if, for argument's sake, it was a contract delivery model of 100,000 hectares, again, for argument's sake, you would then apply, there's a protocol that specify how many traps or lines are required within that control area to give you confidence of the results. And in the contract, we specify really clearly the RTC we want them to achieve, and also how no one trap line can get more than X amount of possums, so you don't end up with all them passing the overall contract but still having pockets of high possums. So yeah, it's using that residual trap catch leg hold method.
How often do you do that?
It would be generally, I would think annually, and that's probably also closely associated with how the contracts are paid for as well. So,
Well, we don't do that at the moment annually, do we?
yes, we have an annual monitoring program, but we're monitoring land occupiers, and that requires, I guess, less targeted monitoring. You're doing much more broad because you're restricted to a property as opposed to a large area. And so we definitely are doing that monitoring. We're using chew cards at the moment. Leg hold monitoring is quite expensive because you've got to go and check those traps daily, and the setup of them is slower as opposed to chew cards, which are much quicker to put out, and you just put them out and then go and collect them in 7 days' time. However, they're not as robust or reliable, I guess, as the residual trap catch method, or from a contracting point of view.
So we do them annually, but if I'm a landowner on one of the rural roads and I'm, say, part of 4 farms, we would annually have...
Sorry, I see what you're saying. No, absolutely not. You're probably
And
talking
that's
once
what I'm
every
after.
yeah,
That's
once
what I'm
every
asking the
10
second
years
question.
if you're lucky. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, from the contractor model, will continue to operate the same way?
So a contract model would be, it would be monitored annually, and it would be targeted monitoring to the areas they're working. Whereas if you're talking the land occupier responsibility due to the sheer number of properties, we couldn't do that. No, you're talking a much longer time frame in returning back to that property. And that's something we've tweaked a lot. So we've had properties that have just snuck through, say 3.9% RTSD is, and the threshold is 4. You give that 10 years, what's that going to be when you get back? So we're trying to use that data to then go back earlier and monitor those as well. But it's a big area to monitor, so it is a challenge. And that's why we'd have to increase the funding required for those programs, regardless of what model we choose.
Under a perfect scenario, how often would a contractor visit a farm?
Look, if it's the current model, land occupier responsibility, and they're getting a contractor on, you'd want them at least every 2 years.
Okay.
And that's just due to reinvasion and monitoring possums at such a small location. If you're doing large scale contracts, you could definitely pushed that out to 3-4 years. They can manage an area based on risk. So if you've got a large area, there's certain areas that possums are going to do better in, and that's pine forest, it's native bush, it's vegetation. Whereas you've got large areas of farmland that they can, I guess, manage slightly in a different manner. So being able to target river corridors, for argument's sake, and whatnot, yeah. It gives them more ability to manage possums as opposed to being restricted to just a farm property boundary, which obviously possums don't stick to. So.
John?
I was just going to make the observation that, to back up Mark's comments, that when you're looking at a landscape scale contractor model contract area, it's much easier to monitor with the residual trap catch system rather than individual properties, and I think that's been made quite clear. The other observation was, I know in the Waikato where we moved from landowner-based self-help schemes to contractor model, there was initially a certain amount of landowner resistance that they wanted to do their own stuff, but we found it didn't take long until the contractors got alongside those people, talked them through how they were going to do it, got on the ground and did it, and in most cases the landowners then became really supportive because they could see the contractors had the skills and the personnel and the techniques to do this work just as well, if not better than landowners, and it freed the landowners' time up to do other stuff. And it's, I think Councillor Taylor's raised the question of where did a contractor model, where was that better than an individual landowner? And it sort of reminded me of, rubbish collection. Everyone used to get rid of their own rubbish years back. Then they introduced a contractor model, and I see it in a similar way that, you get a lot more efficiencies, and once the contractor is established in an area and trusted, there's a high degree of acceptance. The other point was, as well as residual trap catch monitoring, you've also got all those other facets of the contractor's operation that you can audit. It's the customer relationships, the relationships with the community, how do their personnel interact with the landowners, are farming operations upset at all, and those give you a whole lot of better parameters to monitor how a contractor performs. So it's a much wider, more global sort of approach to possum control. So that was some of my observations.
What's the kind of timeline you're talking about there from when was that full contractor, and is it a full contractor model proposed, to when results were starting to be seen, and then you had resistance, but then you got buy-in, and then what sort of timelines are you talking about?
Probably because we let 3-year contracts in a landscape scale contractor model, and I would say by year 2 there weren't any. We as a council we had to intervene to sort of, I guess, mediate between some landowners and the contractor to get the acceptance, but they were in most cases only a handful. And once you sat down with the landowner and talked through the issues, sometimes the contractor was happy for the landowner to carry on and keep filling bait stations and so on, or check traps, and but in most cases that didn't last a long time. The landowner was happy for the contractor to assume that, and that to me came down to trust. It's letting someone else onto the property and trusting that they can do the job, not upset the farming routines, and queer the pitch for the farming operation. So, I would have to say, I may be biased. It's not a conflict of interest by any means, but I'm certainly supportive of the contractor model. I think I've seen it work and can only but endorse it.
Thank you. Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, I think I'm certainly in favour of the contractor model. I remember the animal health board days that they'd come around once every 5 years, clear out blocks, large blocks. I mean, from inland over Ropunga out to the sea. They're huge. But what we noticed was that they actually weren't responsible for taking any carcasses away. And one huge block is something like about 11,000 possums you catch. So, it seems to me that's a real waste of a resource that we have in industry. It's like, why aren't we offsetting our ratepayers' costs or something? If that's the size of the problem we might have. At the moment, either they're getting free money taking all those possum carcasses, or they're just lying there to rot on property. And I know that in the industry, probably the only thing you couldn't use is the claws, but then someone found out that women like wearing them for earrings.
Just don't tell them it's possum claws and they'll wear it.
But the fact is, 11,000 carcasses, someone plucked all the fur off that, used the rest for cat food. You might have set a bit of ratepayers' money for a year or two.
It's not much fun carting 20 carcasses a kilometre down through some gorge, though, I can tell you.
That's the smell of money you'll carry.
Good on you, Charlie.
Another question I was thinking, Mark, when you mentioned about possums, kind of enjoying certain habitats such as forestry and native bush. If we think a bit more holistically about what's going on out there, there's a lot of new pine plantings going on, and there's a lot of new native plantings, whether it be riparian or just hillsides and things. So what does that mean for the future going forward? That, are we creating more habitats for possums to thrive in, but two, if we don't do anything about increasing possum numbers, are they at risk to all those new plantings?
Yeah, 100%. It's not just native too. It's certainly poplar, pole plantings and willows for erosion control. So I know the guys possum control programs coming into place would talk about the severe damage possums would do to the poles, not just eating all the new shoots and whatnot, but also chewing on the bark as well. So we are protecting, to be honest, council investment across the landscape in erosion. Yes, we're doing a lot of planting of native as well, which is fantastic. It'd be in the hundreds of thousands of native plants going into this region right now annually, with everyone doing their bit, which is fantastic. However, equally, we are creating more corridors and habitat for pests, not just pest animals and possums, but also pest plants. So that's certainly something that we need to try and manage moving forward. So yes, we are creating more habitat for possums. If we were to stop managing possums, they would absolutely have an impact on those plantings and the biodiversity that's within them. Possums don't just eat vegetation, they eat all the birds' eggs. There's some cracking photos of them doing that. They eat invertebrates. They have a significant impact all around. They prevent the trees from flowering and fruiting naturally. So it's affecting that whole food chain, which is why I've always been such a strong supporter of possum control. And I think it's one of the biggest benefits our council has had on our biodiversity in the region. I've seen it myself, the impact of removing possums when I was a kid, the sheer density of possums, and to what we have now and the biodiversity in its place. So I would hate to see us go backwards. And yes, I think the possum numbers would possibly be even worse just due to us creating more habitat for them as well. So there are risks. I guess the other risk is if we don't do something soon and we take our foot off the pedal in regards to possum control, it's going to cost more to knock them back to low numbers as well. That's my gut feel. So yes, that's
But nobody's advocating that. You know, we're just looking for the Rolls-Royce model to get hold of possums. You know, and what is the best way to do that at the minimum cost to ratepayer, because the ratepayer, you know, we're all averse to paying more rates. So,
John?
Further to your question, Chair, I think the policy change will impact on forestry properties that are plantation forestry by and large. And, you know, noting that, you know, in terms of the Act, you know, that particular set of landowners need to acknowledge they're probably currently exacerbating the possum problem. And the contractor model will, I think, to a large degree mitigate that exacerbation. Do you think the forest owners as a group are accepting of this policy change?
Mixed. And again, you'll see that in the submission, some are absolutely supportive of the model and would like to play an active role in selecting contractors to manage possums. They are using contractors at the moment themselves to manage health and safety and fit in with their management of the forestry blocks. So they are really keen to be part of that. They have had quite a bit of pressure put on them with the TB outbreak and others from farmers pointing the finger, rightly or wrongly, at forestry for playing a role in the TB outbreak. However, there are equally members in the forestry sector who are saying, no, we're doing our job, we've got our contractors, leave us alone. We're happy continuing as normal as well. So there's both sides that have submitted in this process.
Councillor Taylor?
Thank you. Another question. If it was so, if it was so successful prior to 2000, why have we not pursued this again in the last over 2 decades?
So the initial control, so the possums were largely unmanaged up until probably the late 90s. That's when TB, to my best knowledge, really took off and was across the region. So the Animal Health Board came in and was managing possums in certain areas to try and get on top of the TB issue. There were areas where TB hadn't yet infected herds, and those farmers didn't want TB getting into their herds, and possums were unmanaged and were at high densities. So they came to council and said, look, please help us manage the possums. So the deal brokered was, okay, council will come in, knock the possums down to the low levels, and then you manage it from that point forward. So TB was the actual driver that kick-started the program. So the initial control was undertaken, and then it was handed over to the land occupier. So that was always the model, and that's carried right through until this current day, except council hasn't had to do too much initial control. It's been rolling off the Osprey program and entering into our program because Ospreys manage the possums down to low levels in most cases. It's come through.
And further to that, with the going forward with the contractor model, do you and your team foresee this as something that will be ongoing, or will it be again similar to what it was prior to 2000, that this might just be a short-term get on top of it, or is this something you'd like to see long-term to reach our predator-free?
Look, ideally, in a perfect world, we would have contractors managing possums across the landscape at scale. So they would be doing those contracts long-term. So a particular area would be contracted out for argument's sake, a 3 to 5 year period, and they would be managing those possums ongoing. So we would never not manage possums in those areas. Managing it at scale, it probably means a specific property wouldn't receive control every year because you're managing them at scale. You get the efficiencies of knocking them down and minimising reinvasion, therefore you can manage it as a large area. So each property wouldn't be done every year, but the contract would be done every year and ongoing. Yep. So it'd be a long-term foreseeable thing until the tools, technology allow us to actually eradicate and defend.
Question, got a couple. How fast will we be able to get across Hawke's Bay with a contractor model?
So some planning was done. It was estimated 3 to 5 years. However, it's pretty hard to know until, inflation's constantly changing. How much funding will we get through the long-term plan? That will limit how much we can control in any given year. But I would certainly foresee a 3 to 5 year roll-in phase.
Okay.
Ideally less, but it's all down to the funding that's
Availability
available.
funding, yeah, okay. So then the next question is, if that's how long it's going to take, when will we actually rate at a similar rollout? Because if we all of a sudden rate every ratepayer, and we start here and it takes 5 years to get to there, this farmer has been paying rates for 5 years, and of course he pays rates. I'm not going to do anything about possum control because that's what I'm paying rates for, you know? So has that been given some thought?
Yeah, it has. So and again, I've come in on the latter end of this process. Campbell was largely leading that. My understanding is that discussions were had, and that at the end of the day, it's for it to be able to be rolled out and be affordable, everyone kind of has to collectively put money in the pot for it to be rolled out, and unfortunately some will get it straight away and some won't. If there's options to try and work around that, I absolutely think we look at that. However, it's just an affordability cost.
Subsequent question is, and how are we actually from within, like really, if I listen to the submissions, and I'm a horticulturalist, so we don't have a possum issue, and it's not a pest for us because it doesn't actually do damage on the horticultural land, apart from it may occasionally make a bit of mess in one of our sheds if they decide to actually, that's where they've got a camp from then on in. The symptom really is that we as a council haven't been able to actually monitor and actually put the compliance in place for landowners to continue to keep up with possum control. That's when I listen to the submissions and read the submissions and talking to ratepayers, because in some cases, it's been 5 years before the next two cards are being set out and to see whether actually in their region there actually is an issue or not, which is eye off the ball and farmers get away with it. So if we actually going to continue the same resourcing that we have got now with the new model, we could end up with the same issue again, where we actually not actually monitoring what our contractors are doing, and we actually still get blowouts as well. So how are we going to resource it from within to make sure that actually what the landowners are going to pay for and the ratepayers are going to be paying for, that actually going to be effective?
Yep, and look, that's again what we discussed before in regards to monitoring of contracts and setting those targets. They've got really specific targets they have to meet, and they are very challenging to meet some of those. Another way of doing a contract is to make it output based. So instead of monitoring them and that monitor deciding on whether they pass or not, get paid or not, we specify they shall do this. They have to put out X amount of base stations, they have to service them X amount of times, and they send us all their GPS records and whatnot. Pros and cons to both model. Would still do monitoring, but that's just, it's more like a trend monitor to see how the overall control work is going. With a performance-based model based on residual trap catch, contractors have to put in a bigger cost to cover for having to rework areas that might fail. So the contracts invariably end up costing more, whereas an output base where we're saying go do this, this and this, the risk is managed because they know exactly what they need to do, where they need to do it. However, equally they're not necessarily managing possums, they're doing what we're asking them to do, not necessarily doing the added extra. So there's pros and cons to both model.
So do you think we actually will increase our own staff resources to actually monitor, you think, under the proposed model? compared to where we're at now?
Absolutely, yes. So the part of the costing was to increase the number of FTE to both do contract management and also outcome monitoring as well. And when I say outcome monitoring, it won't just be purely possums. We're also looking at the opportunities to try and measure some of the biodiversity gains and whatnot through the possum control as well, to actually tell
what actually the
people
result
the
is.
story of what we're actually achieving out there.
I noticed some of our community begged the question of why we're not doing browsers and other pests, given that browsers knock out quite a lot of native plants.
Yep.
There's a lot of, we all know there's lots of cats out there. Is for comparison, well, I mean, osprey, you say they do TB, but TB is not only carried by possums. So, what about the other browsers? When would we look at that, and why shouldn't we do it now? Even if we put a bounty on the head or something. You know?
Yeah. So in regards to other pests, so we do have rabbits within the regional pest management plan, whereby we will work with landowners in managing those. Again, they still occupy responsibility though, so they're the ones footing the majority of the bill. We have a program for mustelids, so the predators, where we go out and work with the communities doing trapping programs. Obviously, we're talking about possums. We have a feral goat management program whereby people are all within those specific areas. So we have Mahia is one of those, and one up around Mangahururu Tangatu. And there's also conversations happening at the moment around expanding those and going to different areas where the land occupiers, again, need to contribute to those. So the land occupiers need to agree and sign up to those. The real big one for me right now, and it's a massive issue facing our country, not just our region, is feral deer. They've increased significantly. Very expensive control because it's people with guns, you've got land access issues. It's a massive challenge that I know Department of Conservation are producing a deer management strategy and have finally put some more funding towards it, and we're in conversations with those, but it's still early days. We could actually go out and do more, but it's a cost factor. It's expensive. So we've got to try and, I guess, balance up costs versus outcomes. But we have programs, existing programs in place where we will work with landowners.
Bearing in mind we're going into the strategy, we're probably going to set it off shortly or in a couple of years. Why is there a plan to change all those plans so they can follow up behind this strategy?
To undertake manage other pests.
Yeah, but if we're going to start from one end of the country, bay and move up, makes sense that we change all those other strategies to.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that is something that could be on the table. So if we have real opportunity to manage feral deer at scale, for argument's sake, we then could do another partial plan review of the regional pest management plan if required. Look, we don't always have to do a regional pest management plan partial plan review for pests that people want to manage. We use the Biosecurity Act for those who might not want to manage the pests. So for deer, for argument's sake, if we were to do that, the reason we would include it in the plan is it would then give us the powers under the Act to enter onto property of those who say, actually, no, I like my feral deer, I'm keeping those, and they act as a source that go out and affect other parties. So there'll be a bit of work that would need to be undertaken in that space before we got to that point.
Cool.
It's certainly something we're thinking about, and hey, look, if the answer was there and it was affordable, we'd be doing it, but conversations are happening.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of people asking about it, so
Yep.
it might pay to have an answer ready. Yeah.
Yeah, we could bring something to council, but
John raised a good point at the start about those paragraphs 12 and 13, and we kind of sort of are covering off a lot of the points. Perhaps just target a few that we haven't. So the costings raised by those that either didn't support or unsure do not want any further rates increases. Do you want to talk to landowners is probably the easy one, not necessarily urban because they don't have costs currently anyway, but landowners should have costs currently
You have
under
that
the
rates page.
existing program.
Yep, so
And-
there's an
and-
existing targeted rate.
Yeah, plus the purchasing of the baits and
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
and
Yep.
using contractors,
Yep.
so they won't have any of those costs going forward.
So if the proposed plan goes ahead where we undertake contract management, they would no longer need to engage a contractor. So for those people who are undertaking possum control themselves, I guess the cost that they are putting towards a contractor would then be diverted towards the increased cost of rates. The land occupiers are doing it themselves. It's a time thing, so it's not necessarily, I guess, a financial thing where they can just push it across to their rates, but there's also the purchase of bait that they no longer need to do, and bait stations and traps and those sorts of things, yeah.
Anyone got any further questions on that point?
I think that's illustrated, I just had a look before, in one of those examples, the Wairoa rural property currently paying
Bottom.
8,000 odd in rates, would go to 9,600. So, I mean, what's that, $1,600 increase in rates, but no on-farm costs for possum control that they're currently funding, so.
Over 1,300 hectares.
And that's, is it 1,300? Yeah, I don't know what size the property was, and, that's with the full program, 3.5 million, with the change in rating incidents, so, and I think the Napier urban properties rates may be changed by $30 or something, so it's, I think that's a win-win all round, that you're able to put a substantial program in place with a very probably minor rating increase, considering there's another, it's a full, was it an extra 3.5 million, or is it in funding goes up to 3.5 million for the new program?
Well, it's a varying cost, so it goes up to, and then I'm trying to think of I don't actually have the
It's
long-
quite a bit of extra expenditure though.
Oh, absolutely,
that's
it is,
what I'm-
yeah, significant, yep.
That's what I read out of it.
Yep.
So for those people that were concerned about not wanting a further rate increase, I think those figures sort of, to me, satisfy those concerns that, okay, there might be a rate increase, but it's covering a substantial increase in capital expenditure on possum control. So they're getting significant gains from it in terms of benefit.
Yeah. And one of the other themes that came through, both through the hearings and in submissions, was, I guess, people asking council to look internally first to see if there's any other opportunity for savings that can be rediverted to this program as well. So need to keep that in mind.
Is the plan that we'll continue to subsidise baits and poisons to landowners who want to continue to do their own control over and above? So that will be taken away?
That will be rediverted back into the contractor model, yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question, because I know myself as a landowner, depending how long it takes, either initially or in between rounds, would potentially possibly want to do some interim control.
Yeah.
Because what happens because you don't want to hear from us, if I see a little bit of possum sign at my letterbox, Mark, 265 Twyford Road, got sign, get the contractor here. You don't want to hear that, So we either go out ourselves and do a bit of spotlighting, or we'll fill up our baits again.
We'll run it over when you come in the gate.
I tried that once, but the tree got in the way.
I would really hope that under a contractor model, they achieve the same results as they did when they first started the program, and you simply would not see much, if any, possum sign at all. There will still be people who want to do a little bit themselves, and that's great, but hopefully they go back to full bait stations and empty traps.
The question I have addresses both biodiversity and other pests, and I know you probably can't answer it, Mark, but once this program got underway and you found the monitoring demonstrated very low possum numbers being achieved, is there a ability then to maybe switch targets to mustelids or feral cats complementary to the possum control program?
Yeah.
And I know that's something maybe 5 years out you might contemplate, but I think it's something, if it could be contemplated earlier than that, that would be a big plus from this program. And it's sort of getting a more value for your money, essentially, by just having some differing trap systems or differing toxins out at the same time as the possum work's been done.
I guess there's a couple of things in there. So first of all, absolutely, and that's something that does excite the team in this model, if we were to move to it, is the potential for the inclusion of other pests in the future. Possums, you can manage them annually, possibly even every second year or whatnot, if the control is done really well. Most other pests or predators, you need to undertake control 4 to 6 times a year, so it's not necessarily an easy fit because you're returning to the properties so much more often. That doesn't mean there's not opportunity, though, with new technology coming out alongside maybe taking a focus on high biodiversity value areas where you can then do additional predator trapping as well to just increase the biodiversity gains we're getting. I guess the other component is with eradication work, it's still early days. Obviously, Whakatapu Mahia wrapping up their project, a lot of learnings there. What often happens in that case is external funding comes in to match council funding. It might be 50-50, it might be third council, 2/3 other parties. Having this base model where we have existing funding of a PCA program, if after 3 to 5 years we feel as though the technologies there are in an appropriate place to push forward for eradication, we would hope that we wouldn't have to fund any more of that. We can actually attract an external funding from other parties to come in on top of that to pay for the eradication, and that base funding, once eradication has been completed, can continue to then help protect that area and make sure it remains possum free. So there's lots of opportunities, I guess, moving forward that aren't there present with the land occupier responsibility model because the base funding isn't there. However, we've got to get on top of the possum issue first and foremost and make sure we do it properly before we start wanting to integrate anything like eradication or other pests.
The other opportunity too, I guess, is when this work's being tendered out for contract, it's an opportunity to seek from contractors what added value they can provide, and you can give a few hints in terms of additional predator control at the concurrently. So that's worked pretty well in other situations.
20 deer carcasses are a lot heavier than 20 possum carcasses.
20 steaks aren't. Just another question, please. Is just following on from what John said, it does bring up a question that if you take one pest away, there's another one going to come up and multiply. And have you identified that one?
Yes, so we do know if you remove possums, rodents can increase in numbers. However, again, the generally the tools we use for possum management, such as Brotificum, will also kill your rodents. And if you want to get effective possum control, often you have to control the rodents because they can beat the possums to the bait. So you do have to do an element of rodent control as well. But yes, there is potential perverse outcome of rodent numbers increasing that we'll just have to make sure we keep an eye on.
Cool.
And possibly cats. If your biodiversity increases, who predates that?
Good question. I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's known. But
Anyway, it's actually not really our deliberation today, is it? Otherwise we're down a rabbit hole. Pardon the pun.
There's a petition in Parliament right now for cats. You can jump onto that.
So to the submitters that doing their own work and pretty passionate about the job they're doing, how can we accommodate them in a new proposal?
Oh, that's really challenging because how do you prove one is doing a good job? And if we were to make an allowances for those people who are doing a good job to continue doing it and not rating them, you can imagine the complexities that adds to the system. It's unfortunate because I do know that there are some landowners out there doing a sterling job. That's just part of the decision I guess you guys are making today to go ahead or not. There are going to be some people who are not going to be entirely happy because, again, they are doing the control themselves. I can't think of a way of how we can allow for those people to continue doing their own control without and somehow giving them a rate relief. I think that'd add incredible complexity. Everyone would probably start putting their hand up saying they're doing a great job, and would have to have a process of sending staff out to monitor that, and the costs would. Yeah, it's a challenging one, and I do feel for those land occupiers, but I certainly can't see a process at this point of they can still keep doing control, and maybe they could divert their energy into other predators such as cats and stoats and other things to, again, increase the biodiversity value on their farm. So that's an opportunity.
Can you talk to the similar concerns around just not wanting other people, onto their property and property rights and things like that? What's your response to them?
Look, I can't add any more from their point of view than what they've put in the submission. My understanding, we've had obviously some people submit saying they just don't want people entering their property. It's their personal space. Who are we to have the right to come onto their property? That's their viewpoint. But when we manage pests don't respect property boundaries either. And for a program to be successful, we need to manage pests across the landscape. We can't make exceptions for not leaving properties uncontrolled. So that's where the Biosecurity Act comes into play. We would obviously work with those land occupiers. The contractors would sit down with them and go through all their concerns. And generally, once a relationship is struck and they realise it's not just council coming in and, checking out everything, it's actually a contractor coming on to do a specific job, and they get a rapport with them. We have an agreement in place and it works. However, we do have the Biosecurity Act that allow us to go on and do the job regardless. That's an absolute last resort. It's something we very rarely use here in Hawke's Bay. Other councils are very much the opposite. They don't muck around. They're not going to be slowed down. They'll just use the warrant and on they go. We really appreciate the relationships we have with our land occupiers. We're there to work collectively to manage the pest. And yes, that may mean a few more cups of teas, but that's the process we take. And it's a last resort that our team will use is the Biosecurity Act.
It does bring the question on what size landowner are we talking about? Are we going right down to a couple of hectares, or Because I know there are a lot of our blocks at home are small blocks and a lot of owners, so guys will have trouble in some areas finding the owners and catching people during the day, all that sort of issue.
So for small properties, no, you don't need to manage them all. The average possum home range in native vegetation from memory is around 30 hectares. Look, if it's in a landscape where they've got to move further for food, it's obviously going to be larger than that. So you can manage possums without, say, in an urban environment, going to every property. You simply don't need to. Lifestyle blocks, somewhat similar. You're going to probably go to the vegetation, the habitat, and focus there. However, if it's a 4,500 hectare farm, which potentially there might be those cases out there, we can't not manage possums on that, and we can't just leave them alone. So we're managing possums collectively from a regional point of view, and that's what the whole regional pest management plan is there for, is to work through those and, I guess, get over some of those barriers.
So what is your protocol if you talk about, going and visiting them a few times? It's like 3 visits, then a warrant, or leave something on the fence gate?
Look, for this new model, we don't currently have this program in place, so there'll be learnings. However, I suspect it would be 2 to 3 visits alongside phone calls and emails trying to come to some sort of resolution. And then from that point onwards, being very clear that the work needs to be done, and then going down the Biosecurity Act pathway to enter the property. I don't see at this point why they would need to incur costs if we had to access their property through the Biosecurity Act, because we're going to pay for the work anyway. So it's a slightly different scenario to our existing one, where someone's not meeting their obligations. So it's more just a land access issue.
Getting to the end of our questions. In the paper, I don't see it there, but when we go to full council report,
Yes.
depending what that looks like, big part of our focus has been on biodiversity, right? And so to me, if we're going to have substantial biodiversity benefits, meaning more flora and fauna thriving in a world without possums, then that brings about more sequestration. And so to me, it's quite there's a climate change focus in here as well. Okay. And to perhaps bring that into any further papers going back to council.
Have more focus, I suppose, on the biodiversity benefits.
Right, anyone got any more questions? Social
Concerns, but maybe not questions.
keep raising.
Well, I really struggle with 3 to 5 years, depending on whether we actually get across the Hawke's Bay. But at the same time, the rate hammer is going to come down, and then we have large areas that are not going to be controlled because we take away subsidies. The landowners are paying the rates. Unless you're already now, it's failing. It seems. Otherwise, we didn't have to go down this model. So that will make it even worse. So we actually could, in certain areas, you could really see a blowout, which is not really what we're after. And I really struggle that landowners who actually are achieving good control, they're actually taking almost that away from them. Because why should they actually have to double pay their rates as well as continue to look after them? So I'm personally, I know it could be difficult, but we haven't really put our thought into it. Is a hybrid model, even for the first foreseeable future. And I would note, and Mark, you've made the point very well, and I think John as well, is that if this model actually is going to be very successful, even those who actually are doing an extremely good job now will see that actually if their neighbours all of a sudden are starting to control through the contractor model their possum numbers, that actually the jobs that they actually are undertaking will reduce as well. So therefore they can see, I can see now that I'll take my foot off the pedal. I don't actually do possum control anymore. I'm happy that I now can see that actually the contractor model will happen, and that's what John talked about. But initially, I can really see people have actually put a lot of mahi into possum control on their farms, on their land, and then to take that away, I really struggle with. And to me, it's all about reducing cost, and reducing rates. And it's nothing to do with election because I'm already elected anyway. I know that that they're really struggling, and especially when times get tougher with inflation cost and inputs are rising. This is another input that is going to rise. And if I look at the numbers, Hastings Rural 1, Hastings Rural 2 are the highest payer. On a $4 million property, you pay $600-700 more of rates. That's a considerable amount. That we can well do with. So that's my concern, and that's my view on this. And I really would like to investigate the hybrid model. I think over time that will fade away. And the way I see it is, if you can prove, and these are the five questions that you need to give us assurance that you've got control. And if you're willing to pay for a trap line or a two-card line to see if your property actually qualifies for you not to actually pay the rates, it's either by doing a monitor or they actually prove that they have got traps in place. Just give all your GPS coordinates that you actually are buying bait, and show us your invoices. So there's actually ways we actually can do that, because we are going to increase our FTEs anyway. So there is actually now room to actually be able to do that. And I also feel it's actually very unfair. And Mark, you started off right from the beginning. It's a symptom of we as a council, and that's the way I see it. And I'll take this onus upon myself, that we actually haven't increased the investment in this. And therefore, we actually, the landowners have become laxer and laxer and laxer, and we actually got a possum issue. If we would have actually continued our investment in the monitoring and the regulation and compliance, the landowners may have been more willing. It's a bit like if you don't see any police on the road for 150, 200k, slowly, and you're a bit of a rush, you put your foot down a bit more. It's 105, it's 108. Well, you can't do Napier Waira Road anyway because you go off the track. But that's how I see it. So and I think that's what gradually has happened here. So for us now to go and rate our landowners hard, with maybe us not doing our job well, I struggle with. That's just me.
And further to what Jeff has just said as well, that has been one of my questions, is to, before we even go for this contractor model, have we even tried increasing that one FTE, and improving that monitoring and keeping up with the land occupiers a bit more? Have we? Have we considered that? Do you feel that we could have given that a bit of a go before we made this decision to be contractor model?
Yeah, so first of all, no decision has been made yet. This was just a proposal.
Yes, correct.
So yes, they did look into increasing the FTE required alongside a Section 17A review, which Ian instigated across our section to look at where we were doing well and where we were doing not so well. So I guess we just need to factor in the broader context of what other regional councils are doing as well. So they looked at our PCA program, they looked at how other councils were delivering our PCA program. It wasn't just a factor of cost. And I wouldn't say our PCA program currently is failing. We just know possum numbers are increasing based on just the amount of complaints we get, possums being seen on the road and whatnot. So it hasn't blown out, not a major issue yet. So we do have the option of just increasing our compliance program. There's a cost to that. Mm-hmm. Is that the best model? Look, Taranaki Regional Council have the same model. They do a lot more compliance. They have more FTE for their program. It's a smaller program, and they too are likely or looking at changing to a contractor-based model like Horizons, like Waikato, for a range of reasons as discussed earlier. So if we were purely looking at costs and costs only, then yes, maybe a few more advisors, biosecurity advisors, to go out and with sticks and get a bit harsher on farmers around possum management is the best outcome. But when you're factoring a whole lot of other things around the different tools we can use for possum management, having contractors managing them at scale, people sticking to what they know, not having, as in, landowners back to farming and managing orchards and whatnot. Look, there's a whole raft of reasons in that proposal as to why we are suggesting a contractor model. It's not just a cost factor here. And it's not necessarily because we think we've utterly failed at the PCA program. We just know that it's getting to a point where we need to make a decision, and it's either increasing resourcing to get more FTE to do a compliance-based model, or we bite the bullet and go for a contractor model with all the additional gains that we'd get from that model as well.
And also around that, just reading the submissions again, that there is concern that some contractors don't do their job, and we need to ensure that there is sufficient auditing with contractors. So that's going to be a bigger responsibility on Hawke's Bay Regional Council.
Absolutely, and we know how to manage our contractors, and we collect all their GPS points and tracks, and we do the monitoring and stuff. A land occupier, they don't. They get someone on to manage possums, and they have to rely on them that they've managed their possums. They don't have the tools or technology or the knowledge on how to actually go out and properly audit contractors. Not all of them, some would, but the majority wouldn't. And I think that's where you're finding there might be these discrepancies in how contractors are delivering the work.
Yep.
Equally, again, if the adjacent land occupier isn't managing possums and they're coming onto their property to feed, was it the contractor's fault, or was it just the fact that you can only manage possums on a property level as opposed to at scale? So there's a whole lot of variables in that.
I'm just aware Councillor Van Bake's kind of given us his position where he's at the moment, and I'd like to hear from the rest of the working party where you're at. So was that a question here, John, or?
No, it's more a comment, but
Yeah,
it is pertinent to that, where I see it. And I think when you're dealing with 50,000 hectares under a landowner operating model, it's manageable. Once you get to 300,000 hectares, the scale of it is such that it's, from my experience anyway, it's much more suited to a contractor model where your regional council resource can focus on contract administration, data set management, and auditing of contractors. And I add another one, and I think there is communication with landowners as well as another key component of that. But that means the staff can focus on those aspects and not the actual field delivery and whether farmer A and farmer B are doing what they should be. So it's an evolutionary thing. I think probably all regions started with landowner self-help, then expanded it to community possum control programs and landowner driven, but over time have realised that to get large scale, the contractor model is the preferred one. The other benefit that Mark maybe didn't just pick up in that those comments he made is you are then poised to tackle a much broader suite of predators once you've got a contractor base established, and they are much more in the situation they can draw on whatever particular trap type or bait station type is, or the most modern technology, whether it's audio cues or different lure types, they're in that space and in touch with the research community. So, yeah, I'm certainly supportive of the contractor model. I did have just one query I noted, and Mark, you may have answered it. It was in relation to the one of the Osprey comments about, I'll just try and find it. What was the driver behind forestry's existing responsibilities still having effect until after 2024 and the 4 to 5 years following while the contractor-based model takes effect? You may have made a comment on that earlier that I missed, but
Was that was in the staff?
that's in this Osprey submission. They posed
Yes.
5 questions. That was one of them.
Just find out.
Yeah, I never got why are we actually phasing forestry in? Why don't we actually have from day one you're in?
Yeah, I agree.
Makes no sense.
No,
Yeah.
So
I've got an idea, but I'm not going to say, because we've got 7 people watching, I'm not going to say it publicly why. I think it is, but because one of those might be a big forestry chief.
They're at different stages on their blocks.
yeah, so look, I'm just trying to find our response to Osprey on that particular submission, and unfortunately, it's not popping up through the search. But look, I think they misinterpreted our rollout phase in regards to so they're in, but obviously we're going to have a rollout phase where you can't just chuck contractors out onto the whole place, as we've discussed. So there's going to be a roll-in phase, and so that's what they're referring to. Why aren't they included straight away? Well, they are. We just
It may
can't
take
do
4 or 5 years.
It may
So
take
some blocks get covered.
phase
Yeah.
process to get to them. Yes.
Yeah.
So they're in. If this was to go ahead, they're in boots and all from get go.
Day one rates the full amount, the full
Correct.
Monty.
Yeah, like every other land occupier. There's no land tenure differences here.
It's good.
It's just
thank
going to
you.
take, with the proposed funding that was just put out there, it would take a 3 to 5 year period to contractors to get round to all those blocks. Yeah.
So John, you're happy, you've
Yeah,
summed up your position?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Member, sorry, Councillor Lambert.
I think I'm going to take another look.
Yeah, take another look. Yeah, have another listen.
Still can't get you.
I think I'm quite happy where we've landed. It's quite exciting to think that we might eradicate possums once and for all, and then move on to some of the other pests that are really wreaking havoc in the native part of town and in the forests. With the forestry, I know we're one of those groups that has 50,000 acres of forestry, and we use land-based groups. Previously, everyone does helicopter drops in 1080. Not sure that I'm opposed to that myself at all, but yeah, the contractor does. He doesn't always win. They have the monitoring teams out there, and with the 2 bloody possums a night sort of affair, and he's failed a couple of times. Had to get back in there, and that's what they do. They know they don't get paid until they toe the line. So I've seen the contracts. They're like this, Jackie. Huge, with a lot of compliance in there. You practically got to be a bit of a mathematician to be a trap catcher, a possum control, be a contractor. They do work hard for their money, and I think they earn it. In saying that, I think the country's going to be better off as long as we have a really good plan to get across the whole district. Yep, and we've got a lot of neat natural boundaries here with all our catchments. I mean, back in the day, the problem was just put a rabbit gate across the bridge, and then you got your boundaries secure. But yeah, so those boundaries are still there, and the 6 catchments. So I reckon it's going to be a pretty good future. And on the basis that we've tried this before, and the things we've done before haven't been that successful. So yeah, this is a bit of a do or die effort, I think, on behalf of the council. If we don't get it right here, our name's going to be mud for years and years to come. So yeah. It's all on you, Mark. No pressure. But yeah, thank you. I'm excited for our future. It's cool.
Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, well said, Charlie. Thank you for that. So just through our discussions today, I must admit there have been moments where it's like, you know, in the last 2 decades, potentially there could have been more work done. When it looked like the land occupier responsibility wasn't working, but it wasn't. And here we are now, and we as a council have a long-term goal for predator-free Hawke's Bay. One of our biggest focuses is biodiversity as an outcome. And with this contractor model, we're leading in first eradicating possums, which I think is fantastic. I would also like to see, if this is the route we go down, the contractor model, I really would like to see that expand into other pest management as well. So with biodiversity a focus and an outcome and a huge long-term goal of regional council, I do support the contractor model.
Thank you. Well, I'll kind of sum up and perhaps then we'll move on to recommendations. But yeah, I think, the consultation definitely did its job. We heard from people with varying views, and kind of that's what you want out of consultation, so that you get to consider all factors and opinions and what's happening out there. And I think Councillor Van Beek's highlighted probably the kind of the hardest thing for us to consider, and that is, do we change the model that affects those farmers and landowners out there that are doing a great job, and that kind of probably it's certainly the hardest one for me, and it sounds like it for Councillor Van Beek as well. I think though, notwithstanding the job they're doing, we have enough evidence to know that there's not enough landowners doing it that way. There's some doing it at a substandard level, and then some probably not doing it at all. And the movement of TB from the northwest of Hawke's Bay down this direction probably proves to us the movement going on, and that's TB, but that will also impact biodiversity as well, because that kind of proves that the leakages, if you like, of where control's not happening and how quickly they can move and spread. So for that reason, and I know my role here in council is for what's best for Hawke's Bay, what's best for the region, and to me that is supporting the contractor model. And we're spending, as a region, we must be spending millions and millions on new plantings every year. The momentum around that, on farm catchment groups, urban areas, around natives, riparian plantings, poplar and willow plantings continue in our erosion control scheme, and then we've got the right tree, right place due to start ramping up. And so it kind of it's a strategic fit to me that makes sense with so much else of our work streams going on in council currently. So for all of those reasons, I will be supporting the contractor model.
Can I make one additional comment?
Yeah.
In light to what I've said before, the landowners who actually are doing a fantastic job or even a good job, they actually also support the contractor model 100%, because they also want to see why are they doing it otherwise? They also want to see biodiversity improve. They also want it to be TB controlled, but so they're completely behind us, as I am. From a contract, I totally support the contractor model, but I just find it so difficult that we actually throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's like Russia's coming and invading New Zealand, and we have 20 to 15% or 15% of our population who've got AK-47s actually attacking them and actually holding them back. and say, no, get out of the way because we actually can do better with our army, you know? Because that's what it's like. We've actually got pockets of people who are doing a really good job, and we're telling them, stand down, guys, we come with a big army, you know? So that's the way I see it. But landowners who are actually doing a good job, they're all in favour of biosecurity. They're all in favour of controlling TP. Why otherwise would they be doing it, you know? So, and that's the people I really would like to see support, and maybe through a hybrid model. I think, as John has said and Mark has said, they will possibly fade away over time anyway, and they won't actually put their submissions in that they need to have a rates relief. But hey, that's all I'm going to say. Good. Just in defence of those who are
Yeah.
the landowners.
Can you put it in writing?
No,
They don't shut up, you mean?
and look, we're all in support of them too, Councillor Van Beek. But I you know, if you start talking about rates relief or remission for just those landowners because they're doing it themselves, the complexity kind of just overwhelms me quite quickly how we would manage all of that. And so, yeah, it's just a kind of consequence we're going to have to deal with if we go down this route.
I just wanted to say something a little bit further to that, is that around that whole biodiversity, that this is a benefit for the whole region, and you know, I wouldn't want farmers to think that it's all on their shoulders, that this is their responsibility and it's their problem that there happens to be possums on their land. It's not their problem. The problem comes back from many, many years before this. And so we need to sort of come together to actually fight the problem without putting all responsibility on that land occupier. And I think that a contractor model certainly is putting a lot more responsibility on regional council, but further to what I said before, this is a long-term goal that we're trying to reach around biodiversity as an outcome. So in the new council, whoever may be the new councillors, this will be something, the rating is something you will need to be looking at further as to how this can be fairly taken up by ratepayers, where we will take some responsibility of the biodiversity.
Yeah, look, that's another significant and potentially difficult conversation that we will have to have. And I think everyone agrees, you know, the biodiversity benefits means that a greater proportion of the population take this on. And I hear John's comments around the value amount, but nonetheless, significantly, it's still a percentage increase. To me, you know, I know the full council will probably look at it and think, you know, oh, another percentage on. I wonder whether we have to start look at, okay, if this is a priority, a significant activity for council to do, is there something else that's not so much of a priority that perhaps we can, I guess, move the rates, the finances, the resources across to, and therefore not be just a straight line increase on top of the rates already. But yeah, a big decision for another day.
Thank you.
Yeah. No pressure.
So if everyone's happy to move on to the recommendations, and just might get Lauren or Mark to just talk us through there, because it's not exactly clear. Is that how they'll go through, or do we have to add just in terms of for next steps there? To me, that's not a clear kind of recommendation, but you guys can talk to it.
I'm just reading the recommendations in the paper now.
Could I just ask at this stage, Mr. Chair, do you intend going through the submissions individually to accept the staff recommendations on them?
Do you want to?
I guess when I've been involved in the past, yes, we have.
Oh, okay. Oh, yep.
Yeah, so historically we would go through each staff recommendation to each submission, and we would either, you know, approve, reject, or note, depending on obviously the staff recommendations for each one, or we could potentially approve, note, or reject on themes whichever might be the more streamlined approach under the Biosecurity Act. What's the...
I must say that. I'm mindful that we had we had all of them actually at the last hearing, and then
Yeah.
also as part of the last minutes.
Correct. So this has been a second bite of the apple to read all of the submissions that have come through.
Yeah.
It's really just now about looking at the staff responses and seeing if we agree as part of a working group on the staff recommendations. So maybe if we could go through each submission, and there will obviously be concurrent themes, and there will be quite similar themes for each one, and hopefully we'll be able to try and get a good flow.
Yep, happy to
In
do
another
that.
90 minutes, that's fine. No problem.
There's not a staff response to every one, so would it be just the ones
Correct.
with
Just the
staff
ones that
responses?
do have a staff response. So some of them are agreeing wholeheartedly with our proposal. So those ones obviously we will just accept as are.
Okay, so do you, who wants to lead that then? Do you want to call out each one then, Lauren, or you want me to do that?
No, I can do that. So if we can go to, please, to page 9 of the attachments of Biosecurity Working Party and a separate cover. And if we could please start with page 8, submission 1.
It's the first one, yeah.
Okay. David Barnard, what about the cats? Why not a combined effort to remove these predators? And you'll note that the theme around that is really that we're focusing on possums being part of the partial plan pest review, and that there already is a regional pest management plan to cater for other pests at this stage.
Okay, so I'll just ask if anyone wants to comment on what's been read, otherwise we'll just keep moving on.
Move it on.
So the next one will be submitter 6.
Correct. How would you like to run this process? Would you like each one read out, or are we comfortable just going for numbers?
Go for numbers, I would say.
Right.
You can read.
Perfect.
Okay, so submitter 7.
We've covered that.
Yeah, to me,
too.
yeah, we've kind of covered most of these points.
Yeah, because I thought that actually the paper that you put together, you actually put some reoccurring themes.
Yes.
And so they will come through this as well.
Correct.
So-
So pretty much, and the themes were also identified in the last Biosecurity Working Party for the submissions. So each of the themes have already been discussed. So look, I'm unsure about how you'd
These
like to
were
run
all
the
available
process,
at
but we
hearing.
could potentially just discuss the themes in depth, and then obviously any other concerns.
Yeah, because the questions I've asked are actually from what I actually read and what I actually have heard in my ears and seen here in front. And that's why I asked those particular questions, because they're no different than what I see here in front of me.
I tend to agree. John, do you want to comment on the actual process you thought was missing?
Well, as I go through, there's a few points that I think we need to probably have some discussion on.
Okay, can you raise those then?
You know, the first few are fine. I've got to number 12, Matariki forests. There was a relief sought there, an expectation that existing contractors be given some sort of first right to manage pest control on forestry land.
The answer is no.
But, yeah, they may think that, but I'd have to say, well, why?
Yeah, because otherwise, why land?
If-
those who do their
yeah.
own control, they should also have that right.
Yeah.
If they're a contractor, they can apply for possum control contractors
Like they
that the
apply for
council's
that one.
letting out. I wouldn't see that they have any prior right, and I don't think we should give any sort of expectation to the forestry that that would be considered. Now, I don't think in the staff comment, I don't think you've given any sort of expectations, so,
What I can,
but it maybe just need to be padded out a bit to say that, you know, there will be
the
no-
comment I can add to that is, so we engaged directly with the forestry sector twice and have had conversations with them post then as well, for those who wanted to call up and discuss. What so they raised some concerns around managing health and safety and having contractors that can work in with their forestry processes and whatnot. So we said to them that, look, we're happy to engage with them during, if this process is to go ahead and is approved, we're happy to engage with them during the process of us looking at how we're going to contract that out, so that they are directly involved. They could even potentially be a panel member on the process of selecting the contractor that wins the contract. But we're also really clear that it has to be a competitive tender process, that we can't just give it to who they wish, because we need to make sure we're meeting the standard procurement rules for council. So there's absolutely opportunity to work collectively with each other, but we're certainly not committing to just paying them to get their contractors to do the work.
And I can see where they're coming from, because landowners will be exactly the same. Who've done a good job with contractors, or have a proven contractor who's got the history off the block, know where the hotspots are, done a fantastic job, controlled it. And all of a sudden, here comes Big Brother Council again. No, get rid of that mate of yours that actually does a fantastic job, and we know better. You know, it's tough being on council.
Equally, though, those contractors who are doing a lot of the work have indicated to us they will be contracting, are interested in contracting for this work. And given that they have existing knowledge of the land and the landowners and whatnot, that would be a factor in part of that procurement process. So it's not forgotten about or kicked to touch. It's actually something that would be factored in.
Any others there, John, that you think haven't been kind of picked up in the discussion up till now?
Yep.
Okay, that's far away.
The next one, Mr. Wilson, supporting a contractor model, but not at the increase of rates per property. I can sympathise with these views, but realistically, if you're going to increase the program, the rate inevitably must go up.
Yeah, and we've
However, there's been extortionate rate increases in the last 3 years. Oh, dear.
Previous chair.
Oh, I see, an aggrieved chair, is it?
No,
Chair.
not an aggrieved chair. A previous chair.
Previous chair, yeah.
Slightly different spelling.
Yeah.
And of course, he is right, there will be rates increases because there's an action being taken that is now not taken. But if all landowners were taking the action, there will be a similar amount of cost being applied anyway by landowners. If you add all their invoices and the time that they spent on doing what they're supposed to be doing, you come to a reasonable amount anyway.
If you saw it in its entirety.
Yeah,
that's right.
I think he's also saying that we shouldn't be, whatever relief we're giving here, be putting it onto something else and blowing it out elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then,
Definitely quite a few of these talk about access onto their land. You know, they really want to have that nailed down. Forestry will be really strong on that because they've got very stringent health and safety access rules, and farmers unfortunately have to have that too.
Don't want boys going in there cooking their lunch.
And then I jumped to number 20, Mr Chair. The need to assist tangata whenua to become contractors. And I think this is probably a very valid submission, given that, there's probably a lot of work in the likes of Wairoa where, I don't know, what's unemployment like at Wairoa, Charles, is it?
Well, as I said, we've got 50,000 acres and we employ our own contractor.
Yeah.
So it is a valid question, but it's obviously in the reply it does say it's outside the remit of this deliberation.
And isn't, like, we're not specifically employing the people ourselves, it's the contractors.
But we're employing the contractor. Yeah.
Regional council are, and then it's the contractors employing their teams, their staff, so.
But we expect there to be a fair and equitable process of doing that for all contractors, I suppose.
Yep.
Yeah.
And definitely the ones with a good track record.
Oh, look, from my experience, that happens. I mean, there are means for tangata whenua to
Not
obtain
everybody wants to go
training.
into the back of Ripunga, the lands like this, so contractors, they pick their blocks as well.
And they've got to have
And in the back of Waikaremoana, it's
the right
been in
people
there.
to do it.
Yeah, it's been done before up in Waikaremoana. They have local guys that do the traps up there for conservation. So that's already in place. I can't see it changing.
I think the response is good.
Yep.
The same with the 21 that
Yeah.
do not want a person to have access to property by a right issued by council. Well, that's
By the law,
probably a bit of a naive statement. I mean, the Biosecurity Act, as Mark's illustrated, gives those powers. So,
Correct.
but the way they're used is pertinent. It's got to be done in a tactful and sensitive way. But that's good response. Yep.
And just to be really clear, we do not go on people's property without notifying them.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I know that's how some other industries behave, but no, we always contact the landowner. We discuss health and safety. We discuss the control methods. It's a conversation. It's not just us walking in there.
Yeah, and this is not just for biosecurity either. There's lots of things going on where there would be a relationship built. Yeah. And that would have to be something that's very clear from council, working with contractors who have responsibility for their staff. That message really goes through the contractor staff as well. That they know what is expected about building those relationships.
Number 25, the relief sought was that costs be evenly spread between rural and urban ratepayers. And I think the staff response or the reasons are quite valid. I guess I'm just questioning to the panel or the working party, is that seen as reasonable and an even spread? I know the council will be the ultimate arbiter in this issue, but I guess as we recommend, are we satisfied that's a fair and equitable spread of costs?
Do you have another one? Yeah.
No, I don't.
This one.
I'm just posing the question. Personally, I am. I think it's a very good split.
I think that's where the working group got it from in the first place, from the council.
Yeah, it was certainly the intention from the start that if we go down the track of looking at the biodiversity gains, then the current system is probably more heavily weighted towards rural landowners, and we need to
switch that.
to
Bring some urban
Yep.
financing
Correct.
into it.
Yeah.
No, I think it's good. Are your ratepayers satisfied with this sort of proposed split, Jerv?
Never enough by those who are screaming the loudest about biodiversity. They seem to think are not contributing, so they would like to see more,
Yeah.
if possible. And I think by telling the story well, this is something we can get across quite easily, I would say, but we have to tell the story well, what the reason is for this.
Yeah.
Often possums are seen as a TB vector, so therefore farmers should pick up the cost.
Oh, yeah,
because
yeah.
it's
Which
their
they do
benefit.
through the
Which they
TB
do.
program.
That
Yep.
is still the same.
This still, yeah.
This
we
is
know.
this is moving on a level from TB control, though.
Absolutely. And actually, our focus should actually be on biosecurity.
Thirty-one. Have any comments on that one?
We've got no choice. We've got no choice.
probably best for Mark.
The animal welfare.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, that's where contractors will be discussing the control methods to be used on specific properties. Look, we always have situations where farms might be organic or they have a very specific set of views. So we will do our best to work in with them, whether it's using traps only or something like that. So it's a matter of working through that process with them. To try and come to some sort of agreement. We absolutely only use best practice control tools. That's what we're regulated to do. Everything's, I guess, stipulated within the contracts. It's just a matter of having that discussion with the land occupier to make sure they're comfortable with that. And managing risks as well. And look, this is another reason we do suggest contractors are I guess, less risk in using these control tools. There are risks of accidental biokill, everything from kill traps and foxies and neighbours' cats right through to poor placement of bait stations or tipping old bait out on the ground and stock consume it. And this is the main driver for the environment, the EPA, for reviewing the use of Brotificum, that it's going to get into stock, that will be detected, and that can affect markets, obviously. So there is a real genuine concern for this. And again, using contractors, we can absolutely manage that risk, but not when it's land occupiers using it. So yes, we are very aware of animal welfare and the tools we use.
Is that why possum control, there's a slowdown around lambing? Is it all because of the poison? I just read that the other day and I wondered what that was actually
Interesting.
for.
No, I'm not
That'll
sure.
be more to do with farmers not wanting people
People
riding
on
around
there.
their sheep,
Okay.
disturbing lambing.
Yeah.
Just before we move on to the next one, we're just about being going for 2 hours. I notice everyone's kind of got their cuppa already. So that's, if you're happy to carry on, lunch is 11:30, so it's not far away. So if everyone's happy to carry on, we will.
Go for the fuller one. The other one is actually absolutely cold.
It's ice cold.
Come on, go for it.
I haven't dipped my biscuit in it.
Won't dissolve if they're cold. My biscuit will freeze if I dip it in. Plus, you don't supposed to dip those.
You dip all biscuits, come on now.
33, we've kind of talked about auditing versus the contractor model.
Z.
39, we've talked about introducing other pests over time. Forty-two supports but does not want to pay any additional cost, and so that's where we need to be mindful of the rating increase, hopefully being pretty close to what landowners might already be paying, but also noting the wider regional benefits from a regional program that they will benefit in. We talked about the forestry being included. There's a couple of issues there around property rights, self-control, but we've kind of covered those.
Is that the 49?
Yeah,
I love that
your
one.
favourite one.
Yeah.
What the hell is wrong with you guys?
And what about the roads?
Possums
Well, I
don't
guess
use
it's
roads.
just, it's all about changing that messaging again, and this is, it's fantastic that some landowners want to take their responsibility and take it on as their problem and keep their farms free of possum. That's great, but again, it's just changing that messaging about everybody taking a bit more responsibility for predator-free Hawke's Bay. And that is really just that, making sure that message gets out there.
Submission 50, owners taking own responsibility and not wanting to subsidise those, but we've covered that off well, I think.
In the last 3 years that I've been at council with submissions, often it's sort of in the 80s and sometimes 90% in favour. This is almost close to a 50% that are actually not in favour. 102 versus 37. That's actually quite a number. And if you read through this, and thank you, John, for having us another read. If you read through it, the ones who do control definitely have got something to say about it, and that they're quite vocal about it.
Yes.
24%.
But we also, during submissions, if you recall, me, said to one guy, to commend the good work he does. But if everybody did that, we wouldn't be having this
Correct.
conversation.
Exactly, yeah.
My gosh.
I just note on submission 57, this is a classic case of the freeloader. I choose to opt out of the PCA program as our neighbourhood already has an effective possum control program in place. I mean, I don't know the circumstances, but, it's not my problem, it's someone else's. I don't want to pay.
58, specifically requesting lifestyle blocks. Is that you, Councillor? But yeah,
They will.
Yes, it will be me. There's been one possum on my property before.
So I guess it's a pertinent point that I should probably remind you all of in the complexities of managing this program. So we do monitor land occupiers using due cards, and effectively we convert that to a residual trap catch equivalent, and if it indicates that the possums are above the required 4% RTC, that's when we engage with the land occupier, and if they engage a contractor and work with us to manage the possums, then, job's done. We don't need to go down a compliance route. However, if they say no, they disagree or want to do their own control, that's when we undertake a formal monitor using the leg hold method. The downside to that protocol is the minimum property size for that protocol to actually work is, off the top of my head, at least 30 hectares. So it effectively means properties less than 30 hectares, we would struggle to actually enforce the program and for it to stack up in court. So you've got a large number of lifestyle blocks in Hawke's Bay and they are growing all the time. So for us, we can't manage that risk through the existing program. So effectively they are either excluded or we are just relying on their goodwill to do something like the urban areas. So that's just something else to keep in mind. Whereas with the proposed method, contractors would be controlling possums across those areas.
Number
59?
Yeah, about the not wanting poison
Yeah,
on the property.
what number?
59.
59.
Okay, well, jumped ahead.
We spoke about this. You did say trap. You would discuss that with the landowners.
Yeah, look, so it's really hard to have an answer for this because you need to engage with the landowner or occupier around what their concern is. It might be a concern around their dog accessing the bait. And once we show them the methods and they can see how we can minimise that risk, they might be okay with toxins. Others might just be absolutely against the use of any toxin. And then we enter in a conversation around how do we manage that property through using traps, and is it possible? And there may be a solution where we trap the majority of the property except a steep gorge out the back, which we use toxin or something. There's always a negotiating process there. I can't absolutely say that we wouldn't use toxins on someone's property because they don't want it. However, we would look at the options there and explore that with them. It's not just we are going to use this method step aside. That's absolutely not the case.
Can I go to 63 and just ask the question, Mark? This submitter's referring to Old Hill Road, Porongahau. Is that an area which would be within the existing PCA zone?
Correct.
So they're doing their own program, but a contract. Oh no, yeah, okay. They've opted to do their own program there, obviously. So I think properties like that are doing their own control in the absence of a contractor doing work. So once they're aware that there's a contractor operating in the area, I'm sure they'll be quite happy to pay the small amount of extra rate and have the contractor do it rather than having to meet all the costs themselves.
Yeah, so in essence, their last sentence states, in short, we don't need the service if it costs anything for it. So I think their main concern is, look, we're already doing the work.
They don't want to have to be paying twice.
Pay additional costs.
Yeah.
So.
And if you're a large landowner and you've actually made an investment, they actually may now actually be ticking along quite nicely at a very low level of pest control. And all of a sudden, thousands in for it.
If they've got 100 bait stations out and they're only buying, 3 bags of bait a year or something,
That's right, yeah.
not a big cost for them,
No. Because they've done a good job themselves, Once again,
So the attraction to those people is being able to diversify the predator kill in the longer term. That's I think the selling point to them, that sure you've got possum bait stations in place, but over the next 5 years, we want to be tackling mustelids and rats and feral cats. And
So that story needs to be told.
yeah, I think so.
Absolutely.
Like it's a little bit outside our mandate, but I think it is it's a sales pitch that the program needs to embrace
Good lead into,
for out years. Yeah.
if you move on to 64, would prefer something to be done about rabbits. I think that last sentence is quite interesting. No point one person doing it on their property, then all the neighbours' rabbits just come through the fence. and you could say the same about possums.
Possums.
Yeah.
And after all that, he rejects the proposal, so it's quite interesting.
I think rabbits are only on sites of significance or something, isn't it? What's just
So
refresh my memory what the rabbit program is?
So the rabbit program here is land occupiers are again actually required to keep them to below a certain level, and it's complaints based. And then where there are issues, we will go and work with those landowners in managing the rabbits. We often contribute towards the initial costs and get them to enter into a management program for them to try and manage them long term. But as you're aware, unless you're doing it collectively, it's very difficult because you just continually get reinvasion from adjacent properties.
I know that up in Mangahararu, the conservation area, they had a bit of a concentric circle of trapping and stuff, mainly for mustelids. And when they did that, the rabbit possum on Navy Farm just blew out. So they have to actually combine both.
Yeah.
Or else the farmers get more troubles than they need. Yeah.
68, talking about blanket application of toxins, which is not what we're proposing. So
And 72's got a good point that, some farms have got very low numbers of possums due to the, little biodiversity, I suppose, they have on their farms. And others who've got rivers, streams, gorges, have got lots of pockets of where possums can. So, but they still pay on a hectare, on a capital basis, the same amount. That's Smitter's point.
Just move through.
I hadn't spotted 69 as a submitter of support from the Waikato. That's great.
Yeah, that's the one.
Bird and game, fish and game, isn't it?
Got another one from Horizons.
A Horizons fan.
at 71, not wanting poisons on our property, but also my property is a tiny part of Hawke's Bay, and so if it's one of those very small scale properties, like you say, you may not have to go on there because of the distance possums travel to the neighbouring properties. So she may not need, even under the proposal, may not need contractors.
Down to the habitat and surrounding landscape.
Yeah.
Four, interesting. Support. Because they have got experience, got a foot in either camp.
Yeah.
73 probably pertinent to your concerns, Councillor Van Beek, about someone doing it, feel like they've been doing the job properly, but others aren't, and so are supporting the proposal.
77.
77, he actually spoke to his submission and talking about duplication, which wouldn't be the case.
No.
It was confusion around the roles.
Purpose,
Yeah.
as well.
So that probably begs the question, though, Osprey do their job and eradicate TB, then they move out.
Yep. And the process has been, we then go and meet with every land occupier, sit down, have a cup of tea and explain the new program, their responsibilities, and then we obviously provide them information, and we have been sending out letters every year or every second year to properties as well, just reminding them of that. But we've certainly noticed when talking with land occupiers, they will say, well, you've got to let us know. And when we let them know we sent them the letter, they sort of say, yeah, okay, I didn't read it, because there's so much mail that comes through people's letterboxes these days. It's quite easy just to, I guess, miss it or not read it. So reminding land occupiers of their responsibilities is a challenge. And another very valid point is when properties sell and it's new owners, particularly from out of the region, and are unaware of the programs, it is quite difficult to capture those. If we were to do that properly, again, it's another, we would need to resource that appropriately and have more staff to go out and meet with all the new landowners as properties change hands to explain their. We normally catch up with those people when we're doing our monitoring, and we also have a process where we'll go to pick off X amount of PCAs per year, and the staff member will go out and try and connect with as many people within that property as possible, just to have a yak to see how it's going or whether they're new to and need to explain the rules. So the staff certainly have attempted to keep it fresh in people's minds. I guess just one other point I'd like to make is that there were a number of submissions regarding to land tenure. Forestry was obviously raised multiple times alongside Māori land and Crown land. Just to be really clear, so under the Biosecurity Act, when drafting a regional pest management plan, we can only legally bind the Crown to a good neighbour rule. And that's a very big step forward to the previous, before the Act was amended in 2015, we couldn't bind the Crown at all. So it was effectively a get out of jail free for them. They've kind of come to the table slightly, but you just need to keep in mind, our PCA program borders the Kawekas, it borders the Ruahinis. We cannot require DOC to control possums in there. We legally cannot. We can only require them to control possums with a 500-metre buffer, which is the good neighbour rule. And that is a challenge in itself. So it's just to keep that in mind. Within the PCA program, DOC has a number of reserves. I don't think any of them have a greater distance than 500 metres anyway, but we manage all their reserves on their behalf anyway, and we invoice DOC for that cost. So DOC are contributing towards the cost of controlling possums within the PCA program. It's the main issue is the Kawekas and Ruahinis, and that's a bigger conversation that Ian is having with them. Mm-hmm. But it's a significant investment for them to control possums at that scale. So it's just something I want you to be mindful of.
Submitter 79, we've talked about increased monitoring versus the change in the overall program.
number 80 as well. It really, again, goes back to that messaging for everybody. Hopefully in Hawke's Bay to embrace this, it's, you know, not all of us are going to have possums on our property, but this is about biodiversity as a whole.
83, Ernst Law 1 Limited wish to continue using own contractor. I think it should be stated in the response that once the scheme's implemented on land which includes their forests, they won't require their own contractor, because there'll be a council appointed one, which their contractor is obviously welcome to apply for. But I don't think, the requirements of their contractors aren't that onerous that, it should be exclusively only their contractors that do the work.
Yeah, that sort of follows into 84 as well, actually, is how to become an approved contractor when the time comes. It was something I think you said, Jeff, that if someone might have a really good system in place with their favourite contractor who does the work beautifully, and all of a sudden you've got a new person on board. So how do you explain that?
So we do have a process at council for contractors to become an approved contractor, and that's obviously meeting some of the council requirements such as site-wise approved, health and safety, having proven experience where we know they can do the job and whatnot. So there's nothing precluding those people from tendering for the work. We know Hawke's Bay small. We know most of the contractors, and we have held meetings with those contractors in regards to this process. So it's not new to them. So they I guess do understand the opportunities that are there, and I suspect some of them have been talking to their land occupiers as well about this potential change. So, like I say, it doesn't necessarily mean they won't be doing the work, but we can't guarantee that they will.
So that submitted probably requires an answer to say, yes, there is an approved contractor procedure.
Which particular one are you referring to?
84?
84. So that's the forestry.
No,
And
it's just individual.
Bruce Peterson, he wants to know how
84,
to become an approved contractor when the time comes.
$1 million question.
Yeah, gotcha. Yep, I see that. Yep.
'86, talking about the incorrect details. I think I myself got 2 of the wrong ones. So it's just going to be an ongoing thing, trying to keep that up to date.
Look, we have had quite a large response back from people who have maybe had incorrect addresses or names and things like that. So what we've done is we've actually passed it over to our admin assistant who has updated the database. And obviously once that new information comes in, we just update it as it comes in. But it's obviously not our intent to send it out to the wrong people or to send it out to the wrong address. But so we do apologise for any mistakes in that capacity,
Yeah, look,
but we are
it's
working on that.
something worth
45,000, wasn't it?
4,500.
Sorry, 4,500.
It's a lot of envelopes, I think. Yeah, so 4,500 people in the PCA program.
And you'll be aware we through the last long-term plan put up a case to actually get proper systems in place for the biosecurity and biodiversity space through ICT. The systems we're using are decades old and certainly not fit for purpose, and that process is currently underway.
Exactly. It is very labour intensive, obviously updating, having to edit things as they progress. But it's hopefully something that we can obviously get more of a handle over as time goes by.
The use of alternative, submission 104, use of alternative methods, automatic kill traps, saving money and more effective is the conclusion from the submitter.
Yeah, so the cost of those traps is very expensive. So for us to effectively do control across the region with self-resetting traps would be millions and millions. So it's not to preclude them from the tool set, it's just saying we're not going to just use kill traps. We need to use a range of tools, and that means toxins. Toxins are the most effective way for controlling possums, we know that. Kill traps, yes, takes out possums, but certainly does not get them to low levels. Some possums just won't engage with traps. That's just their nature. So we need a broad range of tools to manage possums, not just one. But like I say, the self-resetting traps will probably be part of the toolkit.
.107 is a feel-good, commending contractors and their pest control and management, in compared to that submitter's efforts.
Is one out at the beach, 117, destroying all our trees we've planted.
The rabbits, is that what I'm referring to? Or
No,
possums?
they talk about rabbits as well, but they're saying possums are back at our beach destroying all our trees.
Same, and then it says same.
Same
the
with the
rabbits.
plague of rabbits.
Mm.
Plague of rabbits. Yeah, so that response in relation to rabbit control could go into that.
Mm.
That's submitter 117. They're off topic, but nevertheless, I suppose,
Yeah.
point them in the right direction. Because I think a lot of that coastal stuff is is it a key ecological area or something that is sort of zoned as a,
What particular area is that, sorry?
it doesn't say, but it's referring to beach and sand dunes, and is it Hawke's Bay, or maybe it's Bay of Plenty that have designated sand dune areas as particular rabbit control areas? You haven't done the same in Hawke's Bay?
No, that would be likely Bay of Plenty by the
Yeah, I think it
sounds.
was Bay of Plenty, yeah. 118 is PanPac. They're taking a similar line to the other forestry companies, but they're, I guess, a little bit more accommodating there, that they would like input into the procurement process for selecting suitable possum control contractors, and I think that's a positive position to adopt. And I think the staff response is correct for that. Um, 122. The response runs on to the next page, but I don't think the reasons is relevant to the submitter, 122.
So they would like to use their existing contractor.
Yeah, the first response looks correct, but rejected their relief and made it, given a reason, but then the reason goes on to all landowners be contracted by contractor before possum control is undertaken.
Yes.
I don't think that's really necessary in this
No.
case.
I guess it's around giving them confidence that it's not going to be just someone new who walks onto their property and doesn't discuss what they're going to do and just crack into it. Sort of around letting them know that there will be a process.
Yeah.
So it might be their current contractor or it might be a new one. Regardless, they're going to be contacted by that contractor and the control methods discussed.
All right.
Yeah.
Like any property you go onto now, you actually have to inform management. That's by rule. Unless you've been given relief.
125 FMNZ. What's that?
Forest Management New Zealand.
Oh, okay.
So they are, I don't know if you're familiar with that company.
Yep. Turangi based. New Zealand Forest Managers, or is it different? Forest Managers New Zealand.
Different. So it's Roger Dickey. He's
okay.
Yeah.
Better than.
Well, Mr Gilbertson urges you to try harder.
Yeah. That's good for another $80.
And $100.
Long-term goal, isn't it, to include further pests? Get on top of possums first. It's a tricky one, the Crown, I'm looking, sorry, at 132. Although only a 500-metre buffer can be applied to Crown land, as you told us. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because, you know, there's a massive wave coming over the hills of the Ruahine into our farmland. It's almost like you need a ring fence that sort of move from the coast and back and then just stay there, barricading, until that side of the Ruahine sorts it out themselves as well. Or within, actually, Crown responsibility. Tricky one.
Do they pay rates for conservation?
I couldn't
think
answer
so.
that, but I don't think Crown Land pay rates, no.
Okay.
No, they wouldn't.
I'm just conscious that it is 11:30 and lunch is served. So if everyone's happy, we'll take a half-hour break and just finish off those last few submissions and then hopefully move to our recommendations.
Sounds good, thank you.
Yeah, stop all here and dive in.
Cool. Well, welcome back.
Yeah, we are on live there.
Not yet. Oh, yeah.
Welcome back, everyone. And we'll just finish going through there's about 20 more submissions just to check on the response, and then we'll go back to the paper to finish there. So if anyone's got any other submitters they'd like to speak to around the response, just raise it now. Particularly if it's hasn't already been covered. Probably the 140 fed farmers talking about the risk of increasing possum numbers before the new model would be implemented. And so if there was a new proposal announced, but some years down the track before it was implemented, you could see landowners think, oh, well, we'll just take the foot off the pedal, so to speak. And so the response there, I think, is adequate around the increase in monitoring during that time to identify those land occupiers not undertaking control. And so that,
but they're paying for it in rates.
Yeah, yeah,
This is the problem.
I agree.
The whole conundrum with this changeover of 3 to 5 years. If we could have contractors across the rohi in year one, never happens, but then you could, but otherwise.
yeah.
Just to add in there, I think also they're referring to the indication we've had from you guys that it won't be funded until the next long-term plan. So it's between now and that long-term plan as well that they were concerned about, which is why we've increased our monitoring, so the existing program being in place.
Okay.
Then the next hurdle being, like you say, the roll-in phase. So there's two delays, I guess. One is long-term plan, the second one being the roll-out phase.
I thought Federated Farmers was also interesting, and they looked at it should be a targeted rate across the board anyway, rather than part of the general rate, so that people could see what they were paying for, I guess.
Yeah, that's kind of their philosophy on a lot of the rating model, not just this particular topic.
The targeted rate is based on, was that land area?
Yeah.
4.5 hectares or greater.
Yeah, but the rate is on
Oh,
so
sorry.
much per hectare,
Land
or
value.
is it just, it's struck on land value?
I couldn't answer that, sorry.
Yeah, it goes on
You end up with a different rate.
capital value,
Capital value,
not land value. Capital land.
So, yes, so the targeted animal pest rate is on capital value, you think?
Their written submissions at the back there.
So you got, if you look at the proposed same split and reverse split, it's based on, land value targeted animal pests,
Yeah. Well,
but not on a per hectare, not on per hectare.
yeah, it's just so many cents per dollar land
Yeah.
value.
Yeah.
Which I guess is almost a proxy for a cents per hectare. In a sense, isn't it? Maybe not. If you take a commercial property in Hastings, its land value is going to be the same as what, 500 hectares of hill country might be, isn't it?
Yeah, we're probably going down a hole that's
We don't want to go
left for
down.
regional councils.
Yeah. But to a big extent, their targeted rate will be, it'll still be targeted. The 30%.
the urban ratepayer.
Yeah. Well, the 70 becomes a general rate. Farmers one will be a 30% targeted rate.
Yeah, the urban properties are only contributing through general rate. The rural properties contribute both through general rate and land value based targeted animal rate. Yep, I'm happy with that.
See if, Mark, you may be able to help me out. So on page 10 of the attachment 1, it says there, keep forestry separate. Why would that be?
Age.
Which one are you looking
Yeah, what are you on?
So attachment 1 of the paper.
Dollar spread.
Dollar spread, that's right.
Oh, yes, yeah.
You take it.
No, I know which one it is, yeah.
And whereabouts specifically are you looking on?
So I'm looking at the headings. So that's talks about the existing proposal, same split, proposal, reverse
yes.
split. And then if you look at the headings of that, it keeps forestry separate. So obviously there is a phase in, phase out.
No, so I think what they've done, oh, that's the current there. I'm unsure why, are you able to answer that, Lauren, why they produced that with the forestry, keeping forestry separate?
I don't think they could model it because currently the forestry rate's different to all other rating, isn't that right?
That is correct, and we're unable to produce a rating example for,
Yeah.
until we actually go through
okay.
the finance and rates
Right.
review policy at the end of the year. So we're unable to actually get those numbers.
So it's not until you do a rejig of all the rating that the forestry land would show up as a rating example.
They finished taking Rural Council to court, haven't
Yeah.
Effectively, it could
Wire
see a
one.
reduction as well, wouldn't it,
they?
Laura?
They haven't repealed it yet.
Effectively, it would see a reduction in the difference in
In
dollars,
theory.
yeah, if you
theory,
added the
yes.
forestry. But those are just indicative for our
Correct.
knowledge.
So we were unable to actually produce an entirely accurate, I suppose, attachment here because, obviously there are still things that we want to implement further on in the revenue and finance review at the end of the year. So that's obviously including things like forestry land as well as obviously 4 hectare blocks and below. So there will be some adjustments to these numbers. This is purely, just for a very quick overview snapshot of what it might look like, what it could do.
A regional
Illustrative.
council wouldn't get any money for doing the dock land,
Doing their work.
dock estate within the PCA program.
Yes, they do contribute
Okay.
to that, yep.
Wow, that's good. Yeah,
It's not a cost on ratepayers. Yeah.
Are you still going through the staff response through these submissions, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, but I'm like you, I'm pretty much at the bottom.
Figured out how the trap is working?
Look like you finished, Councillor Lambert.
Oh, I finished ages ago, actually.
And I am done too.
I was thinking about the, one of the submitters talks about QET covenants are benefiting. And do they already have a reduced rate of rates on QET blocks?
Do QE2 blocks get a rates relief from the regional council? I'm unable to answer that. What I can answer though is the existing possum control area program, council subsidises the cost of possum control. So we will, if they wish to use a contractor for that particular QE2, we will cover that cost.
Just let us know if you're happy. You've gone through all of those, John, and we'll
Yep, I'm done.
come back to the paper. So after all that, does anyone have any final questions from where we've got to? Otherwise, we'll, if everyone's happy, we'll move on to the recommendations. Is everyone happy, I guess, well, with what's written there before we ask someone to move? Or put it better, is everyone clear on those next steps?
Did you have some hesitation over the wording of the recommendations, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, more unclear as to the direction that wording was providing based around our decision, but
Yeah, because I, if I can suggest, I think the first one maybe should read something along the lines that the working party, having received and considered submissions and deliberated on changes to possum control, then goes on to agree the decisions to be made are significant, etc., and agrees to recommend to council that the proposal is sufficient in terms of section 72, and notes that it recommends to council to approve the preparation of the plan, that council should be satisfied with the matters required in section 74 and recommend just think about the last one.
Yeah.
There'll be a subsequent staff report, including the working party's considerations, going forward to accept or reject submissions. Yeah.
Because the
So
scope.
it's a subtle change that the working party has considered the submissions and has deliberated on those submissions and subsequently recommends that the policy change in relation to possum control in Hawke's Bay should be approved by council. Is that the working party's sort of understanding?
So just to jump in there, I agree with what you said, and point 4 is outlining your next steps as the Biosecurity Working Party. So today you've received and have considered the deliberations. You're agreeing that the decisions that are to be made are significant, and that agrees to recommend to council that the consultation undertaken is sufficient. Notes that the next steps of this process are those 4.1, 4.2, 4.3. So the 4.3 is your report that you're going to submit to council, which will be drafted after today based on the discussions held here, and that will be circulated around you guys prior to being submitted to council. And that also applies to the being satisfied of section 4, the 74 of the Biosecurity Act. That would also be an appendix and supplied to you guys to make sure you're satisfied. And that council is ultimately making that decision. Council makes these decisions, so you're going to be submitting this information to council for their decision on that. And obviously, again, 4.1, it's my understanding that it's the council's decision on whether they prepare the plan. Isn't that correct, Lauren? So,
but they'll be seeking the recommendation of this.
So you're going to be
working
recommending that, but you can't make those decisions. So you've been delegated the powers.
Yeah.
And so that's what you'll be doing with your next steps.
Yeah, so just, is it clear what we're recommending today? I guess?
And so the scope of, and that's in point 4 on the top of the page of the paper, is scope of decision. Only 2 options were proposed during consultation. Mm-hmm. So that actually is either 4.1 or 4.2, which was support moving to a contract delivery model for possum management. And then what we're actually recommending is actually the process, how we actually are going to enforce 4.1 or 4.2 under the scope. And I think it's clear that we actually are going to move to a contract delivery model for possum management. And then the recommendations that we're now actually going to approve is how we're going to go about that, which is outlined here in the recommendations, because it's all very clear what the scope is.
Well, is everyone happy with that?
Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's
Always
good.
approve these subject to some editing if you like.
Yeah, well,
That's well clarified.
Yeah, well done, Councillor Lembo. Look, I'm happy to move recommendations as I read, and if someone wants to make amendment after that's seconded, we're happy to go there too.
I'll second that.
All in favour? Aye.
All those in favour?
Aye.
Yeah, easy, done. Against? Carried.
Well done.
Right, that's
I
us.
still struggle with that final detail,
There's a lot
as I did right from day one of this meeting. And, and that's, to me, is that whole gap of limbo, how we're going to go about that. If we're going to go and change to a contractor model, then all of a sudden subsidies disappear. Landowners all of a sudden have no reason to control possums any longer because they're paying rates, and that could take a while before that happens. So to me, it's a poor piece of policy if we actually would implement that. So I believe that needs to have some thought put to it, and I get that out of the submissions that we're getting.
Well, I would hope that if this is where we go, that regional council would look at sort of those the areas of most risk first. So if there's, as per the submissions, there's been a few people who say there's no possums on my land. So hopefully that remains the same until the contractor gets to them. But regional council, I would hope, would start in those high risk areas first. But you need to know about them.
I think like what one of the submitters said, well, that's where you're going to go, and I'll just stop doing things now. But I think you're going to have to expect that anyway, and just be confident that as soon as the plan kicks off, the first step will take into account a swell in numbers for the first couple of years.
So 2024 long-term plan is when it will actually be put into action. From now, between then is a year and a half, maybe a little bit less. Plus then maybe 3, 4, 5 years until actually a contractor can get to their place. And it's a fair period. I would say those who have been actively involved in possum control, if they've got control, they'll just keep ticking over. I would hope. But maybe as an interim, we actually continue to subsidise a poisoned program.
Yeah. So for those, so it wouldn't be rolled over immediately into a contractor delivery model. We need to continue to support them, otherwise it's very unfair. They're both paying the rate and having less services provided.
Right,
So that needs to be balanced up, and it's a valid point. I think we go back, and that'd be part of the implementation plan. So when it comes to putting the funding up for the long-term plan, that needs to be part of what's factored into it.
Yeah. And for the minutes, if anyone takes minutes, I would like to make it noted that I was keen on a hybrid model, where landowners who actually are keen, are doing a good job, that we actually somehow were supporting them.
Right, so on that, staff clear on next steps and report to go through to council at the end of this month. So we'll still all have sight over that, and we'll await that. So thank you everyone for your time today.
Good.
Yeah.
And at that, we'll close the meeting.
It's a good outcome.
Charles, just
Should we do the karakia thing then, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, we'll do.
Okay. Me karakia tātou te manaakitanga, kia tau, kia tātou katoa. Te atawhai, ato tātou ariki a ihi karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, harmony. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.